Now, this notion of treating someone as a means as opposed to treating someone as a mere means has been the topic of a great deal of controversy, textual elucidations, and things of the kind among philosophers and others over the past couple of centuries. And I want to spend a little bit more time explaining one way in which the idea might be elucidated. So, as we saw before, when I use someone as a means, I take from them something that I need or want. The case of the bank teller being one. I take money from them if it comes from my account, and that's not intrinsically wrong. When I use somebody as a mere means, however, I treat them in a way that does not show them a minimal degree of respect. I'm not disrespecting the bank teller by going up to him or her and asking to make a withdrawal. But there are ways in which I disrespect others by treating them in a certain way. Let's see if we can elucidate that a little bit further. A contemporary elucidator of Kant, proponent of some of Kant's ideas, Honora O'Neill, is head of Newnham College in Cambridge, president of the British Academy, and author of influential works on bioethics, justice, Kant, and famine. And Professor O'Neill offers an elucidation of Kant's formula. She writes, suggests that I use someone as a mere means, that is, fail minimally to respect them when I use them in a way to which they cannot, in principle, consent. The idea of consent is a centerpiece of O'Neill's way of thinking about the Kantian formula. And let's think about how that applies. In the case of Rufus, for example, could he have consented to being euthanized in order to save the lives of 10 prodigy children? I suspect we think probably not. Likewise, the terrorist's daughter. Could she have consented to being tortured within inches of her life in order to defuse the bombs that her father had set around the city of Chicago? Probably not. Likewise, if I choose to kill civilians in order to demoralize the enemy when I'm engaged in warfare, again it seems that the civilians would not have consented to being treated that way. Or if I profit from an addict, if I'm a drug dealer and I've got an addict that I'm making a lot of money off of because I know that he really, really needs his fix, then I'm doing something to which he can't consent, at least if he knew beforehand, before he would become an addict, how I was going to treat him, he would not have signed on. And likewise, if I use a lover for sexual gratification, then that's a person that probably would not consent to being treated in that way. These are all cases in which presumably the person that's the target of my behavior or our behavior would not consent to being treated this way if they knew the facts of the situation. If they were informed on what's happening, what the other's plan and so forth, they probably would not sign the form, so to speak, saying, yes, that's fine with me. So the idea of consent here is something that connects up with the idea that when we often act, at least implicitly, on a principle of some sort. Kant writes that whenever we act, he makes a very strong claim here, we act on at least one principle or maxim. And the maxim that we act on, he wants to suggest, is one that needs to be, as it were, tested against, run through the filter of a kind of minimal condition. He writes, an act is right only if it's motivated by a principle or maxim that treats no one as a mere means. That is, this is a second major part of the Kantian ethical enterprise. That is, we should not treat people as mere means, even if we can treat people as means, but not as mere means. And more importantly, that gets put into action by saying that when we act, we have a principle that guides our action, and we need to make sure that that principle that guides our action is not one that includes within it the idea that we'll treat people as a mere means when it suits us. So for instance, if I lie to someone, I'm probably treating them as a means to getting something that I want, and in so doing I'm acting on a principle such as, for example, if I think I can get away with it, lie to someone in order to cut a corner, if doing so will give me an advantage. And that's a principle that treats the person to whom I've lied as a mere means, because presumably they would not consent to being lied to. If they knew what was going on, they would not accept the lie. Likewise, to consent to being treated in a certain way requires consenting to be on the, so to speak, business end of the maxim of that action. That is, think of it this way, if I can imagine my maxim, the maxim on which I act, being one that requires the interlocutor's or the object's consent, I could imagine myself, if I were in their shoes, how would I feel if I knew what was going on? Notice, therefore, that the imperative here that Kant is suggesting is a little bit connected, bears some similarities with the golden rule, what you were raised hearing about probably in one form or another. That is, treat others as you'd like to be treated. there's a connection here with that. That is because the Kantian perspective says my position in the world is in a way nothing special. Just the fact that I'm here rather than somewhere else is something that I should, as it were, abstract from and think of myself as nothing particularly special or distinctive, but rather as one of many more or less rational individuals. And the question that that raises is, if I treat you in a certain way, is that a situation in which I can imagine the connections, the relationship being reversed, so that I was being treated in that way? Is that something that I could accept, particularly if I knew the facts of the situation? If so, then Kant will say my maxim has at least passed a minimal condition for what's required to be ethically acceptable. So a primary example, a central example that Kant wants is the case of deception, and there are all kinds of ways of deceiving others that don't require telling them an explicit lie, but it's still the case that doing so would violate this idea that a person should be able to consent to being treated in a certain way. Likewise, think about the phenomenon of coercion. When I coerce others, they might be pushed in a certain way to behave in the way that I want them to, but if they knew that what I was trying to do was to coerce them, they might still say, that's not a way of behaving that I can accept, that I can buy into. But Honora O'Neill, developing the Kantian perspective, is going to say the necessary connection with consent is one aspect, but it's kind of like a necessary condition for ethically acceptable behavior. We need to move on to another condition that she thinks is important in our treatment of others as well.